Welcome to Africa Carrefour. As this podcast started, one of the topics that I was very much interested in understanding is the issue of African identity. Today, as a lot of Africans, our identity and our history is being given to us from the Western perspective. For example, when we learned African history in school, it starts from when the colonizers arrived. As a Cameroonian, I learned about Hano the explorer and a bunch of British guys who showed up on the coast, and the fact that my country was named Cameroon, a Portuguese word for prawns, and all whatnot. And this has been the narrative within which I grew up to understand my own culture. But today on the podcast, we have with us Derek Ofodinwa, who is a teacher of Igbo cosmology, spirituality, and culture. He hosts he hosts a YouTube channel, TheMedicineShell, and I encourage you guys after this to go listen to some of what he has on there. And today we're just going to have a discussion really centered around African identity, especially from this aspect of Igbo spirituality and cosmology. So, Derek, welcome to Africa Carrefour.
Hey, thank you for having me, Lucian.
Yeah, so how are you doing? How is life in this pandemic era?
We're doing all right. It's been like everybody, it's been a lot of confusion and adjusting, but I think that whatever this new normal is, it's kind of set into my bones. So this is from here on. I have a hard time going back to how things were as far as all the commuting for work and things like that. So it's been a
Exactly. Yeah, I feel you on that one because when I first moved to Houston, I used to live in Spring and I go to school in downtown.
oh God.
So sometimes I would drive 1 hour, and I mean, even though I subsequently moved out of Spring because of that commute and moved closer to downtown, I now like waking up in the morning and in 5 minutes I'm already ready for
Just
work.
turn the computer on. Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, but thank you for joining us today. Today we want to talk about African identity, especially from this aspect of our cultural heritage. And so maybe just to start, you can help us with some simple definition to those that might not be familiar. What is this aspect? What is cosmology?
okay.
And really, what is Igbo cosmology?
Absolutely. So cosmology is it's a vast subject, right? But more or less, the best way to sum it up is to say a people or an understanding of the universe or understanding of how things are. So in this aspect, I specifically focus on the cosmology of my own people, the Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria, and in that, you're able to then uncover a lot of different things as far as explaining the underbelly of culture. In the Igbo language, we have two words. One is Odinani and Omenala. So Odinani is what I teach on the channel, which is the word translates to as it is on the land. That is cosmology, more or less, or the observed science of how things are. Well, Menala is now put on top of that, and that is how it is done on the land. So based on Odinani or how it is done on the land, or Menala has decided how it is done. So the science of reality or the understanding of reality of the cosmos determines things like culture, behavior, so on and so forth.
Yes, thank you for that. And that is very interesting. And to me, I had a question when I actually started listening to your YouTube channel. It was the fact that growing up in Africa, a lot of my idea, really, my knowledge, really came from the history classes, and that was one that started in, I don't know, in the 1800s, and how the explorers landed and all whatnot. So my question is, how do you, in studying Igbo cosmology, how far back can you go to find records about this? Because I will understand that a lot of us as Africans, we grew up in a culture of oral history, so things are passed down and sometimes not necessarily written. So if I want to go now to start a study, because this is what I find really interesting, to start to understand really how things have been done or how things are, where do I find such materials and how do I go back to get really into my culture?
Absolutely. There are different layers by which a person can research, right? So as somebody who is Western educated, like yourself or myself and so forth, the most immediate thing you think is, all right, let me go read something, let me go
Mhm.
find out what has been written. And you'll find that, right? So there are two types of writings that I obviously go to. There's the firsthand documents from a lot of the colonists and things like that. And
Mhm.
then there's the writings by people who are of the culture and they are experts or they understand certain aspects of it, right? These
Yeah.
are a lot of the spiritualists or cultural experts. In my culture, we have a title system. So a lot of the titled men are also wise men in the culture, and they're the ones who retain a lot of the information and so forth. And some of them write books, or a lot of them write books and articles and so forth, sharing what they know, right? That's one layer. But then you have to remember that all people, excuse me, all people, no matter the culture, there's a need as far as survival goes to record history. So a lot
Mhm.
of times we think that oral history is the recording of history in the African context. And
Yeah.
sometimes it is, but most of the time that's not actually where it's at. Our people, throughout the coast of, I'll say the coast of West Africa into Cameroon and so forth, there are exceptions here and there, had a multitude of ways by which we recorded our history. All those masquerades that you see, there's a reason why they look the way they look. Everything on them is a symbol. The route that they move is a symbol. Their names are symbols. The things that they say and do are symbols. And if you put these symbols together, you'll now see that it's actually a lot of the times telling a historical or culturally relevant story.
Mhm.
Another place you could look in, let me put it this way, the teaching of history and so and things like that was infused in the culture. So it
Yeah.
wasn't a separate aspect of the culture where, okay, I'm going to go learn history now and so forth. Just about everything you do traditionally has a reason. And if you look at the underbelly of it, the Odinani that I was speaking of earlier, you'll now see that the it's all there. It's actually well explained, right?
Yeah.
One of the examples I used in one of my videos is that we have a masquerade where I'm from. I'm from a community called Awon Mama, right? And we have a
Yeah.
masquerade called Okorosha. Now, a good friend of mine, Onyemobi, he's not even from there, but he was the one that pointed out to me that it is a water, it is marine related, right? I did
Mhm.
not know this, but then I went back and looked at the masquerade and I saw that it had a bunch of gourds, like water gourds on his chest. I said,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that makes sense. Now, I was talking to my mother about this masquerade, and she said that, yeah, we loved watching it when we were kids, so on and so forth. Whenever they would leave, they would go to the Orie market. Now, the Orie, anything Orie, the word Orie is associated with water. So again,
Yeah.
that connected that same thing to me. Like, oh, my friend had said this as well. Orie is
Mhm.
connected to water, right? And
Yeah.
when they're leaving town or when the masquerade's over, they all gather at the Orie market, and the children will sing Isu alala, or Isu is going home. Now, Isu is a part or another community. It's actually where my wife is from. It's another
Mhm.
community in Igbo land across the river from from where my people are from. So when you put all these things together, now even the name Okorosha or Okoroshi in some dialects, it means the man of the source or the man, the man from the origin, more or less. She is like where it came from, so on and so forth. And
Mhm.
Okoro is man. So if you put all of those things together, it would be pretty hard for me to say that this isn't a story about how my people came from Isu through the river. If you can
Yeah.
connect all those things, and then you take that, you can go to different. I don't know, they have different names for them in different cultures. But in my culture, we call them dibias. So a dibia
Yeah.
is a spiritualist. A lot of them record the history. You ask them, they can confirm these things for you. You can go ask. We have nzes as well. They're also people who record and or keep history. They can confirm these things for you too. So when I went to the authorities with that gathering, they were like, yes, that's absolutely what it means, and they gave me more details and so forth. So things like that, if you look at things like that, you'll actually see that African history before colonialism is better recorded than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
And you can probably go back at least 300 to 400 years before colonialism if you're able to read the signs and symbols and find out where each culture stores its storytelling. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I find this very interesting, especially when you talk about the aspect of name, because for somebody like myself, when you call me by my native name, personally, there is a sense of pride in it because then I know that I come or I am not standing or I've come from a lineage of a lot of, noble people, and it's incumbent on me to be able to continue to reflect that. I
absolutely.
get that part. And I like that, even as as with some of the examples you've given. But what we see in our continent right now is the fact that we have a lot of Western influence that has come in. So, for example, a lot of us grew up in big cities, and so we did not spend a lot of time in the countryside where you will likely get a lot of exposure and
Mhm.
understanding of really the culture. So, why do you think that's do you think that that was a framing of the explorers that came to be able to separate us from our history? Because like now a lot of us grew up Africans not even speaking our own language, not even
Right,
understanding what it means.
right,
And then you did mention the fact that, we can go sometimes, once we put this picture together, we can go talk to a dibia to be able to help us interpret some of this. But the Western narrative and how the Western culture has infiltrated into Africa, it's made of, some of us are scared of going to these DBS. We're afraid that,
right, right.
they're going to say that we are, practicing witchcraft and all whatnot. So how do we reconcile that where, in a sense, the colonizers have created this barrier that has separated us from our own history and understanding who we really are?
I understand. Yeah. Let me say an American proverb that's that says scared money don't make money, right?
That's
So
true. Yeah.
the absolute first thing is that if you are afraid to know yourself, if you are
Mhm.
afraid of your history and the people you come from, then that is your fate. That
Yeah.
you have disconnected yourself from something that is essential to you as a person. If that helps you function better, fine. But just know that that is the fate. So somebody can't want to know their history and then be afraid of going to where the history is recorded, or they don't
Mhm.
can't want to learn their culture and be afraid of where the culture is recorded. Like imagine now I'm growing up in America, which I did. I'm growing up in America, and I don't know, someone from China comes and tells me that if the devil's in the library. If I go to the library, it's the devil. And
Yeah.
if you go to school, that's the devil too. And I go, okay, well, I won't go to school and I won't go to a library. They say, yeah,
Exactly.
don't
Yeah.
open a book either. So if you cut somebody, I mean, you can look at where the design is, right? If a group of
Yeah.
people come and tell you all the places where your information and your connection and your power is stored is evil, I mean, you obviously know what the intention they're coming with is. But if we reach 2021 and I'm still holding on to these ideas, then I'm not.
Yeah.
It's my own fault, right? And
That's
I know
true.
it's tough to break programming. It's easier said than done. And I was fortunate. I didn't really like my parents were. Let me put it this way: I grew up between the United States and rural Nigeria. I never grew up in a city. I even grew up in rural America. I didn't even grow up in a city in America until
Yeah.
I moved to Lincoln later on in life. Which, if you count that as a city, we both know what Lincoln is. So, um, but yeah, so I was lucky to have experienced a lot of these things firsthand. And so
Mhm.
when somebody says, "Oh, you go to a debia, that's the devil," I know I haven't. I had a grand uncle who was firmly in his beliefs, and he was a celebrated member of our family, and there was no issue. I told a story in my one of my videos where he and his wife. I forgot to include his wife because she was an essential part of the story. In fact, she was the main orchestrator of the whole thing. My brother had broken his leg. He was when he was a baby in the U.S. So we went to the doctor. Went to multiple hospitals. One hospital we had gone to had wrapped gauze around us. I'm giving you exclusives because I didn't tell this part of the story in the video.
Oh,
One of them
okay.
had wrapped gauze around his leg, right,
Yeah.
to straighten his leg because he had broke it falling off a high seat.
Mhm.
Well, his leg started turning like a deep purple, and my mom, no exaggeration, with her hands and teeth, had to tear the leg out, or else his leg would have. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but it took, according to her, it looks like his leg would have burst, right?
Yeah.
And so, had this botched medical situation. Now, my parents are immigrants; they don't know their legal rights, things like that. So they just let that slide, or they didn't know at the time. So they let that slide. When we moved back to Nigeria, every doctor we had been to had said that my brother was never going to walk. Right? It was
Mhm.
not going to happen. So we went there. My mom had gone to multiple churches when we were home, and my uncle, who was I wouldn't say he's a debia, but he was very wise or very knowledgeable about our traditional medicines, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He did not officially have the title debia, but he can do everything that a debia is supposed to be able to do. It would be like
Yeah.
if you have somebody in your family who can just like casually do heart surgery, but he never
Yeah.
got, he never got a doctorate or whatever it was for, you know. And
Yeah.
so he goes up to my mom and he goes, "Hey, when you're done wasting your time, bring that boy to me." So my mom was a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
but she was hesitant to go. She was scared. You understand?
Yeah.
Once he got over that fear, he buried his leg underground. They did a ceremony and they did what's called afa, which is a divination
Mm-hmm.
system. They found out that the person he was reincarnated from had an unsettled issue with a woman in the community. He was very
Yeah.
angry at her for something, and the woman came and apologized to him and apologized to my brother. And he's like a 2-year-old baby. He doesn't know what's going on, and and his leg is buried multiple days, things like that.
Yeah.
Within a week of releasing him from the ground, he's walking, and in fact, he's running. His first steps, he got up and started running towards a bowl of rice,
Yeah.
and that wouldn't have been possible if my mom didn't get over that fear. And it's
Yeah.
like, what is it that you're afraid of? This person can heal bones, and you think that's the devil. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? Or no insult. This is not like an insult or a slight on my mom or anything like that. But if you examine a lot of these things that we are or people are afraid of,
Mm-hmm.
it's laughable once you look at it for what it is and you understand what it is. Somebody can heal. There's a medicine that allows women who don't produce breast milk to produce breast milk that I'm
Yeah.
aware of. And there was somebody in my family, not my family, sorry, a family friend who wanted to breastfeed, but she wasn't able to do it, and I
Mm-hmm.
had recommended this. I said, the cure, it works, and, she was afraid to use it because of her beliefs. And it's like, all right, well,
Yeah.
just enjoy your formula. So it's whatever. Again, there are benefits, there are massive benefits to this body of knowledge and what our ancestors left for us. And if you're afraid to take a look at it in 2021, it's your loss. So
Yeah. I get that. And, a part of me accepts that because my own great grandfather was one
mhm,
of these big, herbal and traditional healer back in the day. And
mhm,
this was something that got passed on even to my grandmother and, my mom as well, where they can, with just, some certain type of traditional, either be it grass or concoctions or what have you not, and all, can heal people of some diseases that they've gone to hospitals and it's just been impossible for them to be treated.
yeah.
So I understand that part. And, that to me, maybe it's because I grew up seeing that happen. So I'm not really afraid of, maybe trying traditional African medicines that have not been tested in labs. But do you think that if some of these aspects of our culture were, say, taught in schools, if they were um, maybe brought front and center in our educational system, there will be an acceptance of it a lot more easily, and people are not going to have this fear.
Yeah, I think that's a really yeah, that makes sense. And as an idea, that's a great idea. I think that is something that will likely, I'm very optimistic about situations in Africa.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that will probably be happening in the future as people become more educated. What I
Hmm.
find is that the more aware and educated people are, the more comfortable they are with their own culture, right? And
Hmm.
there's something that always happens with Nigerians. Anybody who's listening and maybe other Africans as well. But I'm sure people can confirm this as well. They always come here. They always come to America, and
Hmm.
when you're in Nigeria, the last thing you want to be associated with is your own culture.
Exactly.
And then you come to America, and then all of a sudden, that is the only thing you want to be associated with because
Yeah.
you now have access. I used to wonder what that was, but what it is you have access to information and perspective, right?
Yeah.
So America kind of brings the entire world together, and at the same time, you have the ability to look at the whole and see things from a bird's eye view to an extent, right?
Mhm.
And you go somewhere, you see someone, they're speaking Arabic, you go to another place, they're speaking Chinese, you go whatever, and then you come home, you're speaking English to your kid, you start thinking, wait, what am I doing? Right. Whereas in
Yeah,
Africa, you're doing that, everybody's doing it with you. So that's life. I have a good family friend who just came here, and we're just telling him just normal stuff about like evolution. He absolutely
yeah,
would not allow this to enter his head. Um, you would not let this. And then, 2, 3 years later, he's like, I mean, he's like, he's actually become like a staunch atheist, agnostic maybe, but I would even say atheist. And he's very into like his culture, and he now is considering naming his kids African names. And
yeah,
prior to that, you couldn't pay him to do that. So I think that the issue is you often have to leave Africa to now have access to information, or to now have access to the rest of the world. But
yes,
I'm noticing, and I'm sure you're seeing this as well in your country, when with the internet, people are now reaching this level of awareness without having to leave, right?
mhm,
So there are people now in Africa that are young who otherwise would not have had access to a lot of these different things, who are now changing their thinking, and they're not. Before, it used to be, if you posted something traditional like 20 years ago, 15 years ago online, everybody would start coming and praying against you in your comment. Like, I bind you in the blood of Jesus, I bind you. Now I've noticed what happens is somebody will post something traditional, one person will come and say something, and then like 30 people will insult that person, like, who brought this,
yeah,
come get out, that type of thing.
yeah,
So again, I think that what's nice about the internet is that we now have that bird's eye view access to information that Americans have had the privilege of having, and maybe other European countries too, for years. And I think that in the future this will happen in Africa. But I think a personal life mission of mine is to speed up that process and make sure that people don't need to leave the continent before they become aware of how things are on a grander scale, and how a lot of what they believe is programming from somebody who is trying to steal their money, right? And so,
yes,
yeah,
yeah.
so
I mean, that's true. That perspective, even for me, it was coming to America that I was able to now get a different perspective of Africa. And I
right,
think that it's sad that living in the continent itself, our own educational systems, we
yes,
have been so brainwashed into not believing anything good really can come out of Africa. I mean, in essence, that's really what it
yeah,
is that we don't have the labs, we don't have XYZ. And maybe that's why even we as Africans don't invest as much in scientific research, because it's that,
absolutely, yeah.
it has to come from the Western world and
Yes.
this Western narrative, then we're going to accept it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and here's the thing, you're obviously a very bright, guy, and I don't need to tell you that, and things like that. So the way you realize that, even with your intelligence, it required you leaving Africa to now see, hold on, this is not what I thought wasn't correct. Maybe this is actually how it is. That is there's somebody who is like you who now doesn't have to leave for that to happen. And
Yeah.
what we can hope for, or we can anticipate, is those people now starting to take power and take positions of influence. Throughout the continent, we have this issue of old men refusing to step out of power. And
Exactly.
there's this, and it's their level of understanding is so far behind the young people that they rule over, that
Yeah.
it's like they're from two different worlds, right?
Mhm.
I remember, my dad's in politics, and I remember trying to convince them in, I think, 2010 or 2012, that the internet is important, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That the internet is important for politics. And,
Yeah.
more or less the idea was, okay, you're just talking about America. This is Nigeria. And what happened was the other party, that maybe somebody spoke to the right person or whatever, but they did use the internet in a very strong way, and they won. Ta-da, and so
Yeah.
now all of them just rushed straight to Facebook. They started, now they're all on it, but I remember that exact election. I was telling them, "Hey, you guys, there's absolutely like I can't find a website for your party. I can't. You're the biggest party in Africa. You got no website. You got
Yeah,
no Facebook page. Nothing. You're not. I have not seen one tweet about you. And the other guys are going all out on the internet. So,
yeah,
like I said, there's this big gulf between people who have had this access to this information and people who came fresh off the colonial experience. I'm
yeah,
optimistic that we're going to start seeing a lot of these things integrated into the education system and so forth.
yeah,
Seeing that happen is a big reason I made this channel. But if not by force, it's a matter of time.
yeah. And that's true. Hopefully, time is going to help us as a continent to have these things to be taught, at least for information
Yeah.
purposes, if not for anything, whether one believes in it or not, or believes one way or another. I think at best, it is good that the information goes out there. So you're obviously very passionate about understanding, culture, how things are, and all whatnot. And I listened to your YouTube channel, and there was this one um, video or episode that you posted that maybe we should talk about. And it was one where you talked about your ancestor.
Okay.
And so maybe because we have you here, you can just give us a recap of who your ancestors are, and narrate to us some of that experience, because you did go into the fact that you had a dream, and in that dream you saw, I think, your great grandfather, I think 5 generations away or something
Yes.
like that,
Yes. Yeah.
and you were able to instantly have this connection. So how how was all of this possible? Like, you know how did you know in you that this was really an ancestor of yours?
Yeah. So, like I said, I grew up. When I was young, we went back to the village. We call it village, but like Nigeria is so dense that every village is a town, especially in the area I'm from. So it's a small town.
Yeah.
So we went back to the village when I was a kid. I lived there for a couple of years, and so I was lucky to have that experience. And it was completely a matter of luck and fortune. It wasn't by design, but we went there anyways, and we stayed there for quite a while. And I had the privilege of getting to know my family pretty well, my extended family, as we call it in this country, and being familiar with my personal family history, right?
Mhm.
As I got older, I learned more. I was told more. I, living there as a child gave me a frame of reference to ask questions. So a lot of times people will say, "Oh, my parents didn't teach me X, Y, Z," but the actual issues that you didn't ask. But then it's not your fault because you don't have the framework. Like, where do you begin? Right. So I knew
Yeah.
where to begin. I knew I had an ancestor who did X, Y, Z. So I can now ask for more details and so forth. So this particular ancestor, his name is Amenaha. He lived, I traced it my own self, and I want to say it was in the late 1800s. This ancestor was a warlord. So he had gone to war with a neighboring community, and he had when I look at the map, this is my own guesstimation from me looking at Google Earth. So he had extended the village by at least 30 to 40%, right?
Mhm.
And just from the war he had with them, and then there was another. Um, Immediately after that, he now goes to war with another individual or leader in the area who was kind of encroaching on his territory and so forth. And he is also the ancestor who ended up meeting the British when
Yeah.
they came there. And so he was known for being able to fight and being a warlord and so forth. And so when the British came, they would go to whomever had the most authority at the time, and try to strike a deal with that individual. A lot of people think that colonialism was like the Westerners shooting their way through, but it was really just a series of agreements and deals and what we now call foreign investment, right?
Yeah.
If we tell an honest story about how colonialism happened, it would be very clear to see it coming when it comes again and so forth. But that's beyond the question. So this particular ancestor, of course, this is hundreds of years ago, passes away. And as my grandpa's passing away, I went back to visit him. We knew he was going any minute now. or any day from then. And so I went back to visit him. And as he's passing, I then have this dream that this particular ancestor, the one from back then, is waiting to speak to me. And
Mhm.
I talk about it in the video, like you said. I went there, and I cannot tell you why I knew that was him. I cannot tell you where that face came from. I couldn't tell you anything, but sometimes when you're in a dream, you experience things, and you just know there's an underlying knowing, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
We in Igbo cosmology, we speak of dreams as belonging to uagon. Agon is your subconscious or your deeper mind, the mind that is connected to all things. So there's a
Yeah.
way that agon, that part of your mind, knows things that you don't need to know, that you don't know on a conscious level, but you feel it, right? So I
Mhm.
knew that was him. I couldn't tell you exactly. There's no pictures of him. There's no drawing. I know about multiple ancestors. It could have been any of. It's not just that this is the only one I knew. I knew about eight on my father's side, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just met him. I knew that was him. I knew that it was some type of confirmation, or I don't know. I couldn't tell you exactly. I don't have a word to describe. I guess my vocabulary is limited in that extent. A word
Mhm.
to describe what he was communicating to me just by looking at me. But it was some sort of like, all right, you're in now, like a confirmation or an approval or something.
Yeah.
But if you would have seen his face, he looked scary. Like it, it wasn't an inviting look, and
Yeah.
that type of thing. And then I just woke up. And I woke up, and from there, I just started feeling different as a person. I made the decision to, when I go home, I'm going to propose to my girlfriend, things like that, and just
Yeah.
and ta-da, here I am. I feel that event kind of was a domino in bringing me to where I'm at right now, and where I see myself going. So
Yeah, so that's actually very, very interesting and important to say. I mean, I think that people have to go listen to your videos to be able to get some of the connection, because this is going to lead me to my next question,
okay,
is that that event sort of created this domino for you.
yeah,
And in one of your earlier videos, you narrated this experience even about, I guess your wife conceiving of your son, him being representative of, someone else that has just passed away,
yes, yeah,
and your son now, I think, is your grandfather, and in the mannerisms and likeness of your grandfather has, he's taken, some of those traits.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So in most African cultures, my own in this case, there is an understanding of reincarnation, right?
Yeah.
And so my grandfather passed. I went to Nigeria to see my grandpa. They I like emptied my savings. They didn't think he was gonna last much longer. The doctor said he's got probably about the end till the end of the month.
Yeah.
And it took me about a month and a half to, get everything ready and go there from hearing that. And, what they said was that, when people are passing, they have a way of waiting. They can wait for
Mhm.
you if they need to. And so he waited. I arrived. And he kept saying, "Yeah, I knew he was coming." I mean, people didn't tell him I was coming because they didn't want to say, "Oh, he's coming," and then I don't, right? And I wasn't
Yeah.
100% sure. So he kept telling everybody, yeah, that he knew I was coming, and this and this and that, and I was coming from London. I don't know why he kept saying London, but he was, he's like probably like 90, maybe 89, 88. So
Yeah.
kind of out there and things like that. So I got to spend some time with him, hung out. He was still very sharp and everything like that. So when he passed, what happens is when the mourning period is over, you and somebody has a child, you can now do afa, which I had mentioned earlier, which is divination, and
Mhm.
find out if the person reincarnated in the new child. So what happened was, we had my son. Everybody knew it was going to be my grandfather just because of the experience of, me going back and spending a lot of time with him and so forth. Um, but my dad went to Umaka, which now I'm from Aomama. He goes to a community called Umaka, which they don't know him, they don't know me, they don't know our story, anything like that. He goes
Yeah.
to a diviner, and the guy goes just out of nowhere. Are you? He says my dad's chieftaincy name, And my dad laughs and says, yes, that's me. He's like, okay, I know why you're here, but I don't do divination on this day. This is our market day because
Mm-hmm.
every community has a day, like a Sabbath day where they don't do anything. So he goes, come back the next day, but I want you to know that your father's returned. And so he comes back, they do the divination, and then he confirms that the son I just had is my grandfather, right? He has returned my
Mm-hmm.
grandfather, right? And so, and like I said in the video, it's eerie, but they behave very similarly. My grandfather would every morning he'd wake up, he'd drink his tea with bread, he would read an entire newspaper, and then he would begin his day. My
Yeah.
son, the exact same thing. He wakes up. I mean, one day I'm going to film it, but when he wakes up, he starts asking for tea. He gets his tea. Now, when we say tea, and I don't know if it's the same in Cameroon, when we see tea in Nigeria, it's Ovaltine. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's right.
So he
Yeah.
gets his tea. He gets his tea. He wants you to read to him. He before he goes to bed, he wants you to read at least 6 books to him, right?
Yeah.
And and from there, he was able to start reading at one going on to two. Right now, he's fully literate. He can read anything, and he's
Mm-hmm.
going to be three in the next few days. And so just the same thing. This passion for reading, this kind of like prideful stubbornness. I don't know how to explain it. Like
Yeah.
he won't use his like potty because he doesn't want people to see him naked. That kind of my grandpa was very much, you know what I mean? Very much like that, and just
Yeah.
there's a lot of correlations between the two of them. But now when we go home, people are going to refer to my son by my grandfather's name and treat
Yeah.
him like my grandfather and things like that. So it's a cool tradition to have.
Yeah. So how did you feel about that when you found out that you were having a son
Yeah.
and, you know, in a sense that I guess this is your grandfather. I mean, how did you feel about that?
When my grandfather passed, there was a feeling of a changing of the guard. So my father became the leader of the family, and again, this was around the time that I started, kind of waking up in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I went and proposed to my girlfriend at the time, and for some reason, I knew that my grandfather was going to come back through me or through my wife and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, the feeling was it's a holistic feeling. It helps things come full circle. It helps you understand life on a different level. When my grandfather passed, there wasn't really a matter of sadness or anything like that. Like people were celebrating because he lived such a good life. Like
Yeah.
he lived a great life. He lived a long life. Had a lot of children. He was very successful. That type of thing. And then so my son coming back, that was also celebrated, or my son being born was also celebrated in the same regard because of the way he lived his life,
Yeah.
and so forth. So one thing that the in Igbo cosmology, we believe that, I say this all the time in my videos, that a person is made up of four essences. There's your chi,
Mm-hmm.
your eke, your agun, and your mo. Now I can explain each one, but the part of you that reincarnates is agun, right? So your agun is the part of you that has a mission in the world. That you come back is the part of you that has a reason. It's also the part that mind that we were speaking about before. So your inner subconscious knows the meaning to your life or the reason why you're here. Your
Yeah.
foremind doesn't know that, right? But your subconscious will gear the person you are for that mission, right? And so I know that whatever my son's purpose or mission in life is going to parallel my grandfather's because they share the same agun, right?
Yeah.
And in that parallel, and then you now start seeing those mannerisms, the reading. My grandfather said that he was educated for 2 years, and then the British people that were teaching him left. And that
Mm-hmm.
was no. Let me correct that. I apologize. He was educated for 2 years. The British left, and before he can be put into another school, his father died.
Yeah.
His father reincarnated as my father, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that type of thing. So I know, or I feel that somehow education, because that was something he held really dearly. Before he passed, he was explaining to us how China and Taiwan don't get along. This is somebody with a second grade education,
Yeah.
downing a newspaper every day. And like you've seen African newspapers, it's not like dumbed down for the average person. Like
That's true. Yeah,
they
yeah,
throw the entire dictionary at you. Yeah, because
exactly.
they want to show you how much French or English they can speak, you know.
Exactly.
So, but you know, it didn't phase him. So I know that whatever the mission is going to parallel, and I'm going to make sure that my son knows my grandfather's story so that it's easier for him. I'm not going to tell him this is who you're supposed to be, that type of thing, but it's going to be easier for him to find himself in knowing that how he lived in the previous life,
Yeah.
and that so forth. So yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for sharing that. And, it pivots to one point that I guess you stress in your video where you talked about the fact that we don't worship our ancestors, right?
right,
So how do we, because there are lots of skeptics, there's skeptics out there about,
absolutely,
this whole idea of African cosmology, more or less talking now, we're going now, Igbo cosmology, maybe there, and also maybe other cosmology and this
yeah,
aspect of ancestors, you know, them you just talked about, your ancestors, having this connection, it created this ripple effect, your son being born and all whatnot. So how do you explain to people that we are actually not worshiping these ancestors?
right. The thing is, and I mean, the more you understand the cosmological systems in Africa, the
Yeah.
more you realize that we're probably the least superstitious people on Earth. And that sounds very weird based on how Africa is right now, but it is
Yeah.
the absolute truth. We are probably the absolute least superstitious because every single thing that's being spoken of can be accounted for in reality, right?
Mhm.
And as fantastical as sometimes it may sound, if you really think about what's being said, it's not anything amazing, right? If I come to the United States of America, now we're talking about ancestor this, ancestor that. We're talking about let's just talk about the U.S. You go to the U.S., every town has a statue of the people that they want to venerate. Every town has a museum of the people they
Mhm.
want to venerate. I can go to South Dakota and they literally carved George Washington and so forth's faces into mountains, right? You go to
Yeah.
every single culture in the world. This is completely normal. This is
Mhm.
it's the other half of your humanity, right?
Yeah.
It's the other half of your humanity. So if you are able to somehow convince yourself that having ancestors is a choice, you know, is a that you maybe you came out of like I don't know a tree or something, and that
Yeah.
having ancestors is a choice. That's up to you. But then you look at the consequences, right? In this
Yeah.
country, in the United States, whenever people make plans, be they businesses, be they government, and so forth, 10-year plan, 20-year plan, 100-year plan, or that. I mean, you in America, it's very rare to find something that goes to 100 years because this is like a 200-300-year-old country, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard to find 100. But it, if you understand that you are a continuation of a chain from the beginning of time, you can
Mhm.
now make plans for that chain, right? The
Yeah.
way I make plans, like, okay, I know that if I reach this age and I don't own a house, I'm going to be pretty depressed. So I'm going to start working now to buy a home so that when I reach that point, I'll have that home, right?
Yeah.
If you're able to think, okay, I know by now if I don't at least start exploring space in the next 100 years, I'm going to be very far behind from everybody else. So I better
Mhm.
now, I'm going to start now, and then by 100 years, I'll be there, right? Now, it's not
Yeah.
you that's going to experience that 100-year space travel. It's not you,
Mhm.
it's your descendants. And when your
That's true.
descendants get there, they'll say that our ancestors, they'll put it in
Yeah.
different words, but it's their ancestors that got them there. You understand, right?
Yeah.
So now shrink that back down into a person who doesn't believe they have ancestors, or like who thinks that this is like something that's just not normal human thought, right?
Yeah.
How do you expect that person, let's say that person becomes a governor or becomes a president, why would that person build a road? You know,
True.
why
Yeah.
would he do that? You understand?
Yeah.
If this
Yeah.
person has detached himself from what existed before him, or somehow thinks it's not a good thing, then that person can only think about maybe say their own children. He's not even going
Yeah.
to think about his children's children's. He's going to think about his kids and himself because that's what he can see. You understand?
Exactly.
He doesn't
Yeah.
see himself as the continuation of a line,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
people, and I always say this, people always talk about, like, a lot of Christians and so forth. They reject the idea of, like, I guess, I don't know, having ancestors. I don't even know how to phrase it in a way that makes sense, but they reject the idea of having ancestors, but they sure as hell will line up when it's time to inherit land, right? They'll line up when it's time to inherit land. When it's time they'll walk around and tell you their last name as a point of pride.
Yeah.
That type of thing. They'll say, "Oh, this is our language," and this and this and that.
Mm.
But they have this adverse relationship with their ancestors, right? Your
Yeah.
ancestors, the way that the space travel example, your ancestors were doing the same thing. I'm going to acquire, like my own ancestor that went to war with everybody. I'm going to
Mm.
acquire all this land so that in 200 years, I am in a good position. Now, you may not
Yeah.
say that vocally, but that's what's happening. You understand? That's why
Yeah.
people do things on a grand or an expansive scale when it comes to time. But when you disconnect yourself from that idea, it is impossible it is impossible to have the thought of doing something that doesn't it's not just for your stomach, because at that
Yeah.
point you're just left with your hands, your stomach, and your mouth. you know
Yeah.
and if you understand that, you'll now look at a lot of governments in Africa, a lot of institutions in Africa, and so forth, and all of a sudden it starts making sense, right?
Yeah.
If you go to the
Yeah.
more progressive countries in Africa and speak to their leaders, they are very historically minded.
Yeah.
Everybody hails Paul Kagame. Some people have negative opinions about him, things like that. But Paul Kagame he is obsessed with Rwandan history. He is
Yeah.
obsessed. He infuses in everything he does. And so he's doing things because he sees himself as somebody who has existed for thousands of years and will continue existing for thousands of years. And he knows where he wants his people to be in 100 years. Like him or
Yeah.
not. I mean, there's of course criticisms, things like that, you know when the settlers came to America. I mean, again, everybody has their opinion of them or whatever, but when they came to America, they knew, okay, if we fight off, or if we wipe this continent clean of life for the next 200 years, and so just go for 200 years, just attack everything walking, our children will inherit an entire continent, right?
Yeah.
They themselves were not going to inherit it, but they had studied the Romans, and they had studied people well before themselves, and they see themselves a continuation of that line, right?
Yeah.
So when again, this is the full scale of your humanity. Your
Hmm.
humanity is not just your stomach and like day to day, and then you die, and I don't know, maybe go to heaven, whatever that is. Your humanity is vast, and it is complex, and a lot of these things are not fantastical or mystical. Oh, ancestor! People think ancestor, they like a ghost is walking around following you. No, it's a real live living understanding of yourself as something that has existed throughout time and will continue to exist. And when you have that understanding, you behave and operate differently. So,
Yeah. I am. I like the way you introduced this topic of ancestors, because in America, yeah, we are very fond of talking about the founding fathers. Oh, this
absolutely.
was not the intent in the Constitution.
Yep.
The founding fathers did not intend this, did not intend that,
Yep.
and all whatnot. So find that interesting that in this culture and in this setting, it is easy to talk about these ancestors as, yeah, we term them founding fathers,
Hmm.
but in an African context, when we call ancestors, people start having crazy ideas that run through their head. So
Right.
do you
Right.
think that it is an issue of language, and maybe it's an issue of us speaking English, because
Yeah.
and things getting lost in translation?
Yep. Good. I apologize if I interrupted you, but the question, I just started laughing when you said it's a matter of us speaking English, because, yeah, that's I mean, that's a big part of it, because it's most Africans have the vocabulary of Shakespeare. Like, I mean, they can tell
Yeah,
you any word. They can pull words just out of thin air. You understand? But
yeah,
once you understand a language at that scale and that level, you now are speaking on an academic level, and you actually have to now start doing an etymological understanding of these words, which we don't do, right?
yeah,
So we
mm,
know this thing means that thing, but we don't know why it means that thing, right?
yeah,
And from there, English, French, and so forth have this mystique that we don't understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we look at a word like, I'm trying to think of, and you see this a lot in science and so forth, but let's okay, macrophage, right? If we say
Yeah.
that a cell, I'm not a biologist, so I'm probably saying something crazy. But if we say, oh, a cell is performing macrophage, we now think this is this big mysterious word. You
Yeah.
understand? And that we don't quote unquote have an equivalent in our language. But if you look at the word, it is a Greek, I believe, Greek sentence that just says
Mm-hmm.
eating something big or big eating. That's all it
Yeah.
says. And you definitely have a word for big and eating in your language, right? So when you
Yeah.
understand it on that level, so somebody, there's a difference between being able to say these words and then understanding what they mean. And if you understand what they mean, it takes the mystique and out of it, and it gives you power as
Mm-hmm.
far as using that language. You understand? But until then, the language will always have power over you. So if somebody comes and tells you, oh, these in our language, in English, these are ancestors, and then they now start telling you that ancestor is an evil thing, right?
Yeah.
If you don't really think about what's being said, you have no means of combating it because you're borrowing a language. You're always going to be in the
Mm-hmm.
passenger seat of that language. You understand?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of words like, ancestor that for, again, though I grew up in Nigeria, I didn't completely grow up in Nigeria. So there's a lot of, or Africa, let me say. So there's a lot of like thinking on the continent that like I can't understand and it's hard for me to speak about in a non-disparaging way, but or in a way that's not condescending, let me say. But
Mm-hmm.
it's, I don't understand how that word can sound bad to somebody, especially if you know it just means your grandfather. You
Yeah.
know, if you just mean is your great grandfather. We have a lot of churches, back home where like you'll just spend 30 minutes like just yelling, I reject my ancestors. I reject, just literally. You understand? And
Yeah.
again, as we said earlier, it's by design because if you come to American churches, you don't hear that.
That's true.
The word ancestor never gets said in an American church, so it makes
Yeah.
you wonder. Okay, why is this emphasized here and not over there? And then if you know again that this is a religion that came to you from somebody who's trying to steal your money, then you now understand. Oh, okay, that's why. You understand. You want me to reject everything that I have, so that when you come to ask for it, I can give it up easily for nothing. I can give it up
Mm-hmm.
easily for what you have. The primary tool of colonialism is going somewhere and convincing somebody that what they have is not valuable and what you have is valuable. And from
Yeah.
there, you can do an exchange rate that is beneficial to you and not to them, and not just in currency and everything, you know. So, yeah, for the amount of English words we know as a continent, like on average, we have to start the business of developing an etymological understanding of some of these words that we use all the time. And once we do that, we now see that what the way we understand these words are often not what they are. They're not as mysterious or strange or grand as they are, and we can then take the driver's seat. I have no issue with somebody speaking English. It's my first language. Um, I would prefer, everybody, use their native languages and things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
I have no issue with English. But if we're going to use this much English, we definitely have to start understanding it on a more intimate level, so that it's not um, overwhelming us or causing confusion in itself.
Yeah. So this is actually a good point to maybe for you to talk about if I mean the probably someone who is going to listen to this and say, well, I want to learn more about Igbo cosmology, or I want to learn more about African cosmology. I
Mhm.
want to get to understand a lot more about my culture and have this information. Besides your YouTube channel, where can people go to learn about some of these? Are there classes around? Are there conferences around?
Yeah. So this is the thing, and it is a case by case situation.
Yeah,
So if we said African, of course with Africa, you have to pick a point and zoom out from that point, right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
and that type of thing. You can't just go into Africa as a whole because I, even as Africans, I don't think we understand how diverse the continent is.
Yeah.
So you have to pick a point and zoom out, right? So some cultures are a lot better documented in a Western way than others. Like it's pretty easy for someone to get information on the Yoruba system because
Mhm.
it's very popular in the diaspora, and a lot of books have been produced as a consequence and things like that. And it's still strong in Nigeria and things like that. If you are African, if you're an African person and you have roots to the continent that are easily traced, you have to get over your fear of your own people. You
Mm-hmm.
have to start getting ready. If you want to learn, you can go back. You need to ask questions to the right people. You have to be comfortable learning this thing. I think that a lot of Africans in diaspora, the ones that grew up here in particular, they see their culture as their parents' culture.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to get mad at me for telling this story, so I'll exclude her name. But I have a friend who she is her father is from one community, her mother's from another. And in our
Mm-hmm.
culture, you're from the community your father's from. And
Yeah.
so I asked her where she's from. She says she was from her mother's community because she and her father don't get along. She doesn't like him and things like that. And I
Yeah.
told her that, and she probably thought I was an ass for saying this, but I was like, no, 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 you're still from your father's place.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, no, that I choose to be from my mother's. I was like, all right, but if you die, they're gonna bury you in your dad's. I didn't say this, but I just kept it to myself. Like
Yeah.
they're gonna, you understand. And so the way land is broken up in my culture is that you're from where your father's from, right? That's
Yeah.
your land. And anytime you're doing anything cultural, that's where you're gonna do it. It's like that's your country in all reality. That community is your actual country, and you're a foreigner everywhere else, including your mother's place.
Yeah.
You're a special foreigner in your mother's place. You're like a dignitary, but you're
Mm-hmm.
still a foreigner in those different places. And the reason I bring that story up is because in that example, you can kind of see that, and this happens a lot with us in diaspora, we see the culture as belonging to our parents. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe we're trying to connect to it based on our relationship with them. You understand?
Yeah.
And that's not true. You are an equal stakeholder in this thing, right? If let's say you have immediate roots in Africa, you're an equal stakeholder to your parents. If you went to your community and your parents, as you're an adult, let's say you're an adult, your parents said XYZ, you say XYZ. I mean, it's just two different people with opinions. It's not their community. It's not their culture. So a lot of
Yeah.
us, have the excuse of, oh, my parents didn't teach me. That's fine. Your parents aren't teachers. You can go to your community. You can go talk to your relatives. You can talk to the people in that community whose job is to teach if you're
Mm-hmm.
interested in learning. But again, we kind of started off talking about fear, and I'm glad you started off that way. I think the big obstacle is fear. People, for some reason, you're just afraid of your own people. You're
Mm-hmm.
literally living in a very, very hostile country to minorities. But for some reason, this is comfortable, and your own people are scary to talk to somehow. So just getting over that fear of talking to your own people is the best way to learn, because again, you have to start from one point and zoom out. The best point to start is your own. Now, let's say you don't have roots in the continent and you want to learn. I have a Patreon. On my Patreon, I keep my research library open for any of my patrons. So I organize all the topics based on, I organize everything based on topics, and we got a bunch of books in there, articles. Everything I use for studying is all packed in there. So if you are interested in learning specifically about Igbo cosmology, I think that that's a great resource that I've been curating over the years, and I add to on a very regular basis. So that's a good place to start. Otherwise, you can always search for books. And then, of course, the absolute best one, which ties to the first one, is going back to the continent and experiencing it yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation. I have learned a lot, and I also learned a lot watching your videos on YouTube
Cool.
about
Appreciate that.
things for me to just think about. And I think that this perspective, and this is to the audience as well, whether you believe or whether you chose to believe them or not, I do think that they are very interesting perspective and information that you ought to know as part of your culture, because again, like we've spoken here, we've talked about throughout this whole hour here, you don't just come out from a tree. You come from a lineage of people. And I think that you do a disservice to yourself if you don't spend time to get to know your own culture and where you're from, and how that can even help inform your own viewpoint and worldview of the world. So thank you very much, Derek, for the conversation. And I hope that folks are going to run to your YouTube channel to get more, or join you on your Patreon. So if they are interested in learning more about Igbo cosmology.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.